Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Hey guys, hope everybody's doing well out there, and glad to see y'all. Hey, keep the questions coming. I haven't been getting questions as frequently the past couple weeks here, and I know I haven't done as many videos because I've been so damn busy with everything at Old Homestead and also traveling out to Pennsylvania, which I'll get into here momentarily. But please keep the questions coming so I can keep the channel going, guys. I'm pretty busy right now, but I'm going to keep doing videos where I can and how I can, offering you the best possible distillation advice for a home distiller and or potentially professional distiller, depending on your questions. As always, I appreciate you guys. Big shout out to Jesse over at Still It. So obviously I was on his channel with a podcast all about Belle Epoch Absinthe, and I believe it was actually all the audios on the podcast as well. I love working with Jesse. Can't wait to get into Old Homestead Distillery, and I can't wait for you guys to see Old Homestead Distillery. This weekend is actually pretty exciting for us because the hotel is open. Now, the distillery is not up and running. The humidor is not stocked yet, but we're getting close to the extent that we will probably be at least in moonshine production within the next 2 weeks, and full-on whiskey production within the next month, I would say. Trying to blast through a lot of ingredients that we've got on hand that we need to get through, and start laying down some barrels of whiskey, guys, and various other spirits, agave spirits and all that stuff included. So can't wait. Really looking forward to it. Just got back from Pennsylvania as well. Went out there to hang out with my friends / chosen family, Aviana, Eric, and Jim Wolf, and my buddy Aiden Pemberton. We were actually out there not only to work on the project that we're calling Wolf and Wilson, which is a 1700s mash bill for rye whiskey from Pennsylvania that we've sort of added our own Hoosier spin to, as well as Eric's own spin to, for a Pennsylvania exclusive product in the future. But also for a Veterans Historic Trades workshop, which was amazing. We had Amanda and JJ out there from Moonshiners, obviously. We had Steve Bayshore from out at Mount Vernon out there. We had the Cooper for Colonial Williamsburg out there. We had Ken Schreiner from Schreiner Spirits out there. We had Laura from the Fields Foundation out there. All around, just a great time, great presentations, good folks, lots of good veterans, lots of veterans interested in home distilling or that already are home distilling that had great questions but also had a lot of great information themselves. I did a little mash-in, ignore the hand, I've been painting today, so there's that. But I did a little historic mash-in of some rye malt whiskey, and that was a lot of fun. Talked about yeast propagation, also talked about a little bit about malting, very basic information, a little distilling 101 sort of stuff. But man, what a fantastic time, fantastic audience, and great friendships forged, and great friendships I already had very much so strengthened. Aiden, of course, was Aiden Pemberton, my very good friend, was actually talking about apple cider production, and was able to make a little bit of apple cider and take out there and let the veterans try that. So that was also extremely cool. So anyways, be sure that you're following Old Homestead Distillery out there, right, on social media, or check out the website as well. 28-room hotel attached to a distillery, guys, with a cigar humidor. VIP room will be coming at some point in time. Awesome little lobby / lounge area and tasting room. We're going to be doing classes. We're going to be doing tours. We're going to be making every style of spirit that you can possibly imagine as well. And I am super excited about it, guys. This is the first time that my moonshining background is coming in league with my professional distilling background, and there are no rules, right? There's no painting yourself into the corner here. This is, we do what we do. We make what we like to make, but we also make what the audience responds to. There will be some interactive stuff where, customers will get to sort of decide on maybe various different flavored moonshines, whether that's post-distillation flavored or during distillation flavored. We're going to ask you to rate spirits and stuff like that, so we can really focus on what we may or may not want to put into distribution in the future or keep in production at the distillery. It is going to be very consumer focused. Obviously, it's going to involve all the things that I've always been into with distillation that I've never been able to play off of in the past. And pretty cool. As always, the books are still available, The Alchemist Cabinet Volume 1 and 2, as well as the Distiller's Almanac. Probably bring that down here very shortly for this year, working on the new one as we talked about before at thealchemistcabinet.com. Of course, every dollar that goes back into helping us keep this channel going and helping me continue to do my research. It also goes towards feeding my family. That's sort of primary focus of being a distiller, I believe. But let's jump into some questions here, guys. So first and foremost, the last time I went to Pennsylvania, and I don't know if I said anything about it on the channel or not, but Eric and I actually went out and gathered some historic yeast from the old Kaufman Distillery and the old Becker Distillery there in Lidditz, Pennsylvania. We do intend to use that yeast for production of Wolf & Wilson products in the future. I can tell you that yeast will never be used in the state of Indiana for any commercial product, because I feel like it belongs to the state of Pennsylvania. It's part of Pennsylvania's heritage. Just like the Wolf & Wilson whiskey will be, pretty much a Pennsylvania only thing, other than maybe a few cases here and there that come back to Indiana potentially for distribution. Once we get to that point, that's a long way down the line. We'll see how that all goes and what Eric and Avi and I decide to do with that product for sure. But Dan Black, who was following that project and who actually came out to the distillery the first time I was out there back in late February, early March, knew that we'd propagated those yeasts. So he says, when propagating, did you feed with grain? I wonder if any benefit would be achieved in propagating/feeding with grain varieties grown in the area that the yeast strains, were initially harvested from. Propagating using grains from the Klein family farm that grows rosin rye for Eric and Aviana, and corn ideally would build a strain that is truly locally sourced. Was hoping to hear a recorded follow-up conversation of you, Wolf, and Bayshore debriefing about Apple Brandy collaboration. Have a great weekend. Well, first and foremost, so at some point you might hear me and Eric and Bayshore and Aiden talk about the Apple Brandy collaboration we did out at Mount Vernon. We've just all been so crazy busy at the moment that we just haven't had time to sit down and do much, recording or podcasting, myself included with my own ventures. But at some point I will sit down with those guys and we will sort of debrief the Colonial Apple Brandy that we did out at Mount Vernon for sure. But in regards to your questions, Dan, so I wonder if any benefit would be achieved from propagating using grain varieties grown in the local area. So I don't know how much benefit would be made just because the grain varieties being from the local area. Probably to some degree there is some adaptation there, but I don't know if it's something that would be overly noticeable. What I always tell people though about propagating yeast is make sure that you propagate the yeast using the medium that you actually intend to ferment with. Yes, you can use, regular white wheat and sugar. You can use whatever grain that you would like to use. But whatever you're planning to use that yeast in, I would plan on using that same mash bill and those same grains particularly for the propagation medium. I've had much better luck with that. Yeast doesn't like to go from one set of circumstances to a whole new set of circumstances. So for example, I would never go from using one of my propagated strains for rye whiskey over to bourbon without adapting it to that medium first. I would certainly never use a yeast. Sorry guys, a little tired. I certainly never use a yeast for grain production to go into an apple brandy without getting it used to that medium first. So there is benefit to propagating on the grain that you're going to be using for your main fermentation. It would be cool to use the local grain varieties to actually be able to propagate that yeast. And yes, it would be truly locally sourced, but it is locally sourced regardless because of the circumstances in which it came from, to the best of whatever our abilities are. So I think that kind of answers that question. It looks like maybe you have another question here. Let's see. I wish you much continued success and blessing in your recent venture. Thank you very much, man. I have a question as more of a simple curiosity. What's happening with that Pennsylvania yeast strain you collected and propagated? Absent the wheat intolerant water, is that culture still propagating? So I answered your question about what's happening with the yeast strain. It'll end up in Pennsylvania at Stolen Wolf. It'll be an exclusive thing between our projects, Wolf and Wilson, or if Eric and Iviana want to ever use those yeast strains for, Stolen Wolf products, obviously that is entirely up to them. So I have propagated the Becker strain and sent that back to Eric. I am still propagating and toying around with a little bit the Kaufman strain, which seemed to be a little bit weaker, but we're getting it where we need it to go. I will eventually get that dried and get that sent out to Eric as well. You guys might have noticed that Dan called the water there in Pennsylvania wheat intolerant water. And the reason for that is I was joking around with Eric the first time we went out there in late February. He had bought wheat flour instead of just buying, ground wheat. and trying to get that to go into suspension in the cooker was a little bit of a pain in the ass. So my joke was that the reason that Pennsylvania historically made rye whiskey was because the water in Pennsylvania is gluten intolerant, for whatever that's worth. But anyways, okay, there's Dan's questions. I think we move through and get a couple more questions in. We're only at about 9 minutes or so, and I don't mind to make these 15, 20-minute videos sometimes. So let's see what we've got. All right, so from Terry, I've heard you mention that the bourbon market may be weakening. Well, just curious what you see replacing it as the spirit of choice in the marketplace. I've wondered myself, the straight corn whiskey, gins, or American single malt category, or even the rise of botanical spirits. Just curious what your thoughts are. Thanks again. Well, if you guys are paying attention to the news, you are seeing the bourbon market weakening pretty substantially. If you were in the industry, you started seeing this about a year plus ago when MGP prices on barrels for non-distiller producers started coming way down compared to what they had been. NDPs are really struggling now. People figured out they can buy the same whiskey from other producers for much cheaper than what they can buy from a lot of the NDPs. The bourbon market is so incredibly flooded right now as well that, you know, unless you're a big guy, it's going to get rough on you for sure. And although Old Homestead will make some bourbon, that will not be necessarily our main impetus for the distillation business. We'll be doing a lot of other really cool spirits as well. I don't necessarily see this so much as a switching out of categories. Bourbon's still going to be a thing, and it's still going to be a mainstream thing. It's just very much so that the small producers or the producers that aren't heritage brands are going to struggle a lot more as prices keep coming down. And so craft distillers and those smaller brands and those younger brands may not be able to continue to produce bourbon. A lot of them are going to go out of business. It's just the way it is. It's a shakeout. Happened with beer several times over the past 20 plus 30 years now. So I'd be prepared for that. What I do think is that you're going to see a lot more regionalized products. You're going to see specialty products that catch on and get like a real following, for like a cult following sort of thing, that I think is going to be very important outside the bourbon category. I don't know that American single malt, and I'll probably get some flack for this, but I'm going to say it. One of the mistakes bourbon made is they let Scotch catch up with them. I don't know that American single malt will ever have the draw that Scotch single malt's going to have. Yes, there's a market for it. Yes, I think it will grow. I just don't think it'll grow to that extent. It will be a good market for craft distillers for sure, but I don't think it's going to compete with Scotland in any way, shape, or form in the way that bourbon can. I think the closest thing that comes to that would be rye whiskey. There's still a lot of levity in the rye whiskey market, especially for differentiated ryes that aren't 51% barely legal Kentucky ryes and are not 95%, Indiana style ryes. Certainly, Stolen Wolf is positioned very well. I also think that Liberty Pole in Pennsylvania is positioned very well, and I hope that Pennsylvania in general gets a big boost off of whatever's going on with bourbon right now in particular, and that maybe they can step up and get in the footprint of some of those people who aren't necessarily, into the big bourbons anymore, or more into the craft thing, or looking for something different. I think there's a couple categories that could be interesting. I think that the single malt category is interesting. I think botanical spirits that are not gin has some really unique possibilities, including sort of hybrid whiskeys. TTB would label them as DSS, but sort of inspired by what was going on in the British Isles in the early days with botanicals mixed with grain whiskey, essentially. I think that agave spirits, as long as you're not the guy or gal out there saying, oh, this is our version of tequila, this is our version of mezcal, I think that they have a real possibility. I think just being nimble, being quick, being regional, and not thinking you got to take over the world is going to be the trick. It's not so much positioning yourself within one category to get the attention that bourbon has had the past few years. It is, again, as I've said many times, sort of getting into and attaching yourself to a tourist attraction. It's going to be necessary. Build up that local following, get a following that also wants to come from far away to come to not necessarily your distillery, but to the local tourist thing, and then market off of that local tourist thing and make it a very localized regional food shed sort of thing, which is something that I know that distillers and marketers out there think they've done. They thought that they sort of understood the local food movement, and some people think that that's done. I never saw a distiller once, not really, that understood how to market to that. Not in any meaningful, regional, culturally appropriate way on any kind of sustainable scale. So, hope that kind of answers that question for you. I know that was a lot of rambling, and I do apologize. I'm pretty prone to rambling. So, I think I got one more question here. Let's get into it. So, let's see. Okay. All right, so here we go. So this was from one of the YouTube comments about sparging. I agree, sparge with hot water, a bit hotter than your mash temp as far as reusing heads and tails on whiskey runs. Haven't noticed anything I don't want coming through after many times. I'm assuming on a home level I'm not rerunning as much faints as you would on a commercial level. I have to look out for that. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, you know, when you get to a larger size still, then you probably start to notice sample size changes. And, you know, like I said, for me, after running heads on a stripping run 4 or 5 times, I start to notice some off flavors. I'm not necessarily building any more heads or tails because heat cycling breaks down the acetaldehyde and the ethyl acetate, but I am noticing that you do tend to get some off flavors on whiskey, and I never, like I said, rerun apple brandy heads ever. And I know there are people out there that don't agree with that, but listen, different roads to Rome, guys, and I feel like I've established myself pretty well as a craft spirits producer, and maybe even better as an apple brandy producer when I was at Spirits of French Lick. So with all the awards that we won on that, let's see, I'll have to look out for that. Interesting what you say about the brandy. I have not done a brandy yet, and I'm gearing up to do an apple brandy. I understand the flavor you want from a brandy is more in the heads as opposed to the tails on a whiskey. I bought a single plate for this and plan on doing one run through a single plate for this reason. I guess I will see how that goes, but any input you have on this will be appreciated. Great info always, Alan. Thanks for what you do for the home distilling community. Well, thank you very much, Jake. I appreciate that. So a lot of people do say that, oh, the apple brandy flavor is really in the heads. I don't agree with that at all. If anything, I actually cut cleaner on apple brandy than I do on whiskey, fairly substantially, because there's a particular compound in apple brandy heads that smells and tastes like red raspberry, and it's really alluring that you might want to keep it. I never have kept that. I've actually always made my cuts on apple brandy much, much cleaner than when I made them on whiskey, and I would bear that in mind. And you can do that with a single plate as well. My advice on apple brandy always, though, is that the highest quality apple brandies that are made in the world still come out of the Pays d'Auge region of Normandy, other than when they were made here in southern Indiana, when Indiana was the world apple brandy capital. I am a very firm believer that apple brandy should be double pot distilled if you have the capacity to do that and if you have the juice to do that. I think it makes a better spirit. It makes a fattier spirit. Now, granted, if you're going to do a clear spirit or a younger spirit, I think single pass is completely fine. But if you're going to go into a barrel for long-term maturation, I would consider doing double pot still, and definitely don't cut into those heads early. It's much more about the apple varietals that you are using and the yeast strains that you are using than it is about where your cuts fall. These guys that say that, you know, the flavor is all in the heads on apple brandy, if you're using a subpar apple, then maybe there's some tricks there that they figured out. But I would say find you some good traditional cider type apples if you can, or base most of your brandy off of Golden Delicious because it's one of the few commercial apples that really holds up. Stay away from Honeycrisp. Honeycrisp is nothing but a ball of water when it comes to fermentation. It does not make a good cider, and it does not make a good spirit. Most of your culinary apples do not. So that's the advice that I would really give there. And I would also not save and recycle my heads. I would save and recycle my tails over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, always on apple brandy. So I apologize, I'm a little quiet. My voice is a little weak, I guess, from talking over the weekend and, you know, not being as well rested as what I probably should be. But anyways, guys, please keep the questions coming. bishopshomegrown@gmail.com, YouTube comments below. Check out thealchemistcabinet.com and order the books. And feel free to reach out to me on social media, guys. I love y'all, and we'll catch up soon. Later.